In this video, we're going to react to the Netflix movie Witcher Nightmare of the Wolf. It's an anime movie that was created by the folks who created season 1 of The Witcher, and season 2 is coming out on December 17th, 2021. And Nightmare of the Wolf premiered today when I'm recording this on August 23rd, 2021 on Netflix. We're going to start out talking about just my general impressions as a Witcher game player, a Witcher books reader, and a fan of season 1 of The Witcher. I really enjoyed this series or this movie. It's about 83 minutes, I think, long. It stars Theo James as the young Vesemir. So it defies a lot of expectations, a lot of things that you expect from this origin story for Vesemir. A lot of those expectations are defied, but basically Vesemir starts out as a uh, servant in a nobleman's house, runs away to become a witcher voluntarily after meeting Deglan, the witcher, who's voiced by Graham McTavish, who's also going to play Dykstra, the spy master, in season 2 of The Witcher. So that's kind of odd that he has those two roles, but he's a great actor of The Hobbit fame and many other great productions. Uh, there's also going to be a different Vesemir in the show in season 2, uh, but we have kind of a little roguish Vesemir here in The Nightmare of the Wolf, produced by Mir Studios in South Korea. So this anime feature talks about Vesemir's origin story, but also goes into his travails about 70 years after his birth with the story of which I don't want to go into. So I'll say I'll go into it, but I don't want to go into it right now. I'll say that I'm going to get into kind of a spoiler territory pretty soon. But this takes place 100 years. This is not the spoiler part, but it takes place 100 years before the events of season 1 of The Witcher or season 2. About 98 years they put here on the timeline. Um, And so Vesemir is, kind of seduced by the riches and the power of Deglan the Witcher, and he eventually follows him to Kaer Morhen and goes through the trial of the grasses and becomes a Witcher and is successful, but he also leaves behind uh, his love interest back at the manor house. And then we are get through flashbacks his training, but we also and his life uh, as a young boy, but we also get him in his 70s as a mature Witcher, and and how he deals with some mysterious deaths in the woods near Kedwin. All right, so I want to go into kind of he also is Lara Pulver plays Tetra the Sorceress, and I think if you see these trailers, a lot of people said, "Hey, that is a lot. That sorceress looks a lot like Yennefer. Is that his love interest?" And that is one of those. And this is spoilers. Uh, so spoiler alert. We will talk about spoilers in this. That love interest is she's not right. There is not a sorceress love interest. It's actually I think another thing that defies expectations here is that the sorceress, the beautiful sorceress, is not a good person in the sense that it's not one of the heroes or heroines of the story. Normally, you have these kind of cartoons, and it's the pretty people that are the heroes, and it's the kind of uh, scary monster-like people that are not the heroes. But true to The Witcher, even the villains and the heroes are more complex. That everyone within the story has a complex story. We think that Deglan, uh, who is the mentor to Vesemir, should be the hero, and he is in many ways the hero, but he's also the villain, um, because he was introducing monsters into the world, but it eventually pays for it. Lara Pulver, who's basically the villain trying to get rid of the Witchers and scheming and bringing monsters in the world to attack Kaer Morhen. Uh, but we also see that she is also somewhat sympathetic in her death, that she was avenging a wrong to her family, and that it was not that she's just some pure source of evil, but it has her own story, and she's a gray character, as so many characters within the Witcher universe is gray. And I what I love about The Witcher as a fantasy series is the characterization, right? So if you go to the Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire, it's not so much the characters, but it's the plot and the complex motivations in the plot. I thought the motivations here could have been more complex, in that I thought there was going to be more of a political drama, but it was more of a personal drama. It was more of a character drama, and I think that is somewhat true to the Witcher universe, that it's a character-driven series. And if I were going to rate the greatest fantasy series of all time, I'd put The Witcher at the top, and below that would be Song of Ice and Fire. Below that would be Lord of the Rings, uh, because of just the ingenuity of it. Now, of course, I don't think that Beau De Mayo has really captured the spirit of Andrei Sapkowski in terms of the wit and just the beautiful characterization he has had. But it is still a character driven story, and and the characters are not all black and white, even if they do seem in the side of evil or the side of good, as we see it. Um, I think it's also just an interesting origin story for Vesemir, and also the fall of Kaer Morhen, because all we know from the books, and um, I think we'll know from the TV show, is that he was the sword master, he was the fencing instructor, and we get to see how he became the fencing instructor. Basically, his mentor said, "Hey, go help these witchers train with the sword," but he didn't want to be the fencing instructor. He was just there, and I think that was really interesting. That it was. We always think of Vesemir as kind of like this fatherly figure, and that he's very concerned about nurturing the Witchers, but we see here Vesemir as a rogue who just accidentally, uh, you know, started teaching some young Witchers. Also, I mean, the great unexplained within the whole Witcher universe is, how did the Witchers lose their ability to create new Witchers, right? So by the time of Ciri, there's no Trial of the Grasses, because nobody knows how to create the Trial of the Grasses. So I think that that's really interesting, that they put at least some backstory to this that Sapkowski really hasn't. I do think this whole thing about creating mutant creatures. I think that was explored in Sapkowski's book, his kind of prequel type book to the series. I think went into that more, and I didn't think that was one of his strongest books. So that the fact that they kind of went into the creation of mutant monsters, and humanoid and monster mutants, it was okay, but I guess it was right within the context, because they're talking about creating the mutant Witchers, and so you would think that the people that were into that would also be into the creation of monsters or the creation of witchers. So I thought that was kind of an interesting outcome that we kind of know where Vesemir stands and how Vesemir his backstory here kind of very much parallels Geralt's in that his children of destiny were foisted upon him. It was not something that he signed up for or aspired to, that he didn't want to be the leader of the Wolf School of the Witchers. It just fell into his lap at the end. I also, I thought I was definitely not surprised by the Illyana uh, um, being Lady Zerbst. I think that was pretty well um, forecast. Although I was surprised that Lara Pulver ended up and as Tetra ended up being the villain. It was true that Tom Canton's and Filavandrel's role in this. I don't know why the Elvish theme was necessary within this story, except to say that there's kind of racism in the world of The Witcher, and there's a lot of kind of pogrom type activity, and that's a kind of very very common theme within the books in the show, and also in the games by CD Projekt Red. Uh, so I do like Tom Canton, and I really enjoy his Twitter. He's just always in uh, go elves, so I enjoyed having him there regardless. Uh, I think that still I thought the whole storyline with Lady Zerbst, i.e. Illyana, Vesemir's youthful love. I thought that was very, very much parallel, very much referential, at least possibly, to Countess Mignole in Hearts of Stone. Obviously, Lady Zerbst is much older than Countess Mignole, so if you just think of the timeline in terms of Vesemir and the woman, so Lady Zerbst is like 70, 100 years before the time, over 100 years before the time of Hearts of Stone, which is like the 1270s, and we're talking about the 1160s. So basically, Countess McNoll and Hearts of Stone for The Witcher 3 is like a later love interest for Vesemir. Both of them are not canonical, I think, in the books, but I think that that theme, at least, that Vesemir is not just this father figure. He has his own life and his own passions and his own loves. And I thought that was I thought that it was decently done, and I really hope that Beau De Mayo, who's the writer who wrote this, will get the opportunity to write some more backstories. Um, like whose story haven't we really pursued? I'd be really interested in. Obviously, they've got the prequel for Blood Origins for the initial creation of the Witchers and the conjunction of spheres. But I would be interested in seeing an anime movie about Duny and Pavetta, right? The mother of, maybe a movie just about Duny, right? Duny's story, I think, would be interesting. But I guess it's possible that they would not want to do that before they get to the end of the series. I don't know. But maybe that would be interesting. I think another interesting time period for them to choose uh, would be kind of the origins of the elder blood, right? Going into the kind of the elder blood and that which is really called back to in all the stories of the saga, that to go to the original elder blood ancestors of Ciri. I think that might be an interesting path to pursue if they're looking for ways to expand on the universe in an anime format instead of in a series. I think they probably have enough series with the two that they're doing. I hope that Blood Origins does well. So far, they've not signed on a Henry Cavill type actor for Blood Origins, but I think it could be really good. I think they're also suddenly in a much more competitive landscape, but maybe there's sufficient demand for all these series. You've got Lord of the Rings that's being produced. We've got the Wheel of Time series, which is coming out in November, and then season 2 of The Witcher. And in 2022, we're supposed to have the Fire and Blood series for Game of Thrones from HBO. So, I mean, I think that the big thing is that HBO left this kind of fantasy genre, which they kind of made into the biggest genre in the world in terms of viewership with their Game of Thrones all the way through season 7. They kind of destroyed the franchise in season 8. And they also failed to create prequels or sequels to this, even though there was a lot of material with which they could have done that for Game of Thrones. And it's just a wonder that we're sitting here 3 years later, and maybe that was the 2022 for Fire and Blood promise was made before the thing that's happening in the world and slowed down all productions, including The Witcher season 2. Uh, I just think they lost a lot of ground to Amazon Prime and Netflix, and for no reason. They should have been rolling out the Fire and Blood and other spin-off series to Game of Thrones, but for some reason they didn't, and that's a great tragedy. But I think if you're ranking the fantasy series, for my personal ranking, The Witcher is the best written fantasy series, followed by Game of Thrones, followed by Lord of the Rings, and then followed distantly by Wheel of Time. But I know a lot of people disagree with me. I think that they have different strengths, though. Of course, Lord of the Rings created the genre, but the material for Lord of the Rings is a Silmarillion, and I don't think that's relatively good material for a fantasy series. Personally, because I don't like the writing, I don't enjoy it. But I think that for instance, George R.R. Martin writes a lot better fake history books, like lore books, than the Silmarillion was done. And then the Wheel of Time is more a young adult series. I think it's somewhat different, and I don't know. I'm on book 14 of the Wheel of Time. It's very long. I like to do it when I'm out in the wilderness and have no access to the internet. I know that the Wheel of Time book is not going to run out, but it's just not. I just don't think the artistry is as good as with the creativity of Sapkowski and the wit of Sapkowski versus the wonderful political intrigue of the Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. All right, so we will be on this channel. We cover The Witcher, the TV series, and also the Witcher video games. I highly recommend you check out The Witcher 3 video game, which is still a classic and still wonderful and still very much on par with modern RPG games, but it's got a much better much better done than most of the new ones. And then I also cover RPG games in addition to fantasy TV. Happy watching. I highly recommend you watch The Witcher: Nightmare of the Wolf.